Pillar talks taxes. He has been for over 45 years, and there isn't a human on the planet with more experience solving problems on behalf of taxpayers. He wants to solve your problem whether you know you have one or not. So if you do have a tax problem, get a hold of him by calling his office or visiting his website. If you don't have a tax problem, your current tax problem is taxes themselves. So let's get into the current policy issues of the day. The main one being that Billy Long is out as IRS Commissioner after only 2 months. But why? Why was Billy Long really short?
Well, I don't know. The short answer is the Trump administration has not given us a specific reason why they bounced Billy Long. As you said, it's only been 2 months. How much can you screw up in 2 months? I don't know. Long appeared to be loyal to Trump. Of course, loyalty is a huge issue for Trump, as we all know, and Long seemed to fit that bill, particularly in terms of his view of the Internal Revenue Code, which we've talked about in the past on this podcast. So the short answer is we don't know. And I will say this in response to that. Senator Ron Wyden, who's a Democrat senator from Oregon, who's opposed every single Trump nominee for every office you can imagine, including the dog catcher's office. He's just opposed a single one of them. He's made the statement that Long has committed some malfeasance while he was in office, and he released a report that said, and I'm quoting now, he says, "My investigators have obtained alarming information pertaining to Long's conduct at the IRS. We have begun to investigate this." So he thinks that something has gone on with Long's conduct at the IRS, but there's been no mention of that by the Trump administration.
Well, naturally, the Trump administration probably wouldn't be telling you if there was something going on. But of course, they also say, hey, something's wrong, but we're not going to tell you what. One thing I want to point out is we also didn't know why Billy Long was in the first place, did we?
So not only do we not know why he's out, we never knew why he was in to begin with.
Maybe that's why he's out. I mean, it's a better reason why he'd be out to be in, I suppose.
Well, let's hope that's the reason. Let's hope that somebody realized, and maybe it was the Treasury Secretary, maybe he realized that Long is out of his element, that he doesn't belong here. There was a report somewhere that Long got fired for this. Long put out a couple of emails over the last few weeks inviting IRS representatives to go home early on Friday. A couple of emails saying, take the rest of the day off. It's not like we've got that much work to do around here, so just go ahead and knock off early. It's fun Friday, so go to a barbecue or something. Now, I don't know if that's true. That was not in any of the official Treasury Department reports that I read, so I just don't know about that. But you're exactly right. What was Long doing there in the first place? Billy Long served in Congress for about 10 years. He's a congressman from Missouri. In his professional career, he was an auctioneer. He was a real estate agent. He had a radio talk show for a while. While he was in Congress, he worked on agricultural issues. Nothing that he did had anything to do with taxes or finance. He's not a CPA. He's not a tax attorney. He's not an IRS enrolled agent. He's not a financial planner. He's got no background whatsoever in tax of any kind.
He's a turtle on a fence post.
Say again?
He's a turtle on a fence post.
He was a fish out of water for sure. Now again, was he brought into the IRS specifically to do something with respect to reforming the agency in terms of Trump's vision for the IRS? I don't know.
It was our speculation in the episodes where we were talking about when he was nominated. Other than sending IRS agents home early, I mean, it doesn't seem like he really did anything to that effect. So did they find someone they want to replace him with already, and they have to?
It could be the case, although they haven't named who that person is. Right. Unfortunately, what we've got now is the acting commissioner, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. So he's doing the job. Billy Long was the 7th IRS commissioner since January, and the other 5 were acting commissioners. Danny Werfel was the commissioner when Trump took office. Danny Werfel resigned when Trump took office because Trump made it clear that he wanted to bring in his own commissioner. Then we go through 5 acting commissioners. Then we get Billy Long. He's out. So now the Secretary of the Treasury is the acting commissioner. And frankly, what I'm troubled with is the fact that we've got the Treasury Secretary functioning as the acting commissioner. I think that's a mistake.
What exactly is the problem with that?
Well, I think there's 2 problems with that. First of all, Bessent has no background either in managing this kind of a major organization. Now he's managing the Treasury Department as the secretary. That's true. But the fact of the matter is that that's more of a cerebral function than the IRS commissioner, which is very, very hands, right? The IRS commissioner has to, he's not a policymaker. He is supposed to institute policy and manage a workforce of about 80,000 employees. His job primarily is to be an administrator. The commissioner's job is to be an administrator, to manage this agency, to enforce the law, and to make sure everything within the IRS is moving properly according to the plans of the administration. The Treasury Secretary's job is completely different. That's a policymaker. The 25,000 foot view of what's going on here. So it's a completely different role. Bessent now has got his hands full at Treasury with implementing all of these tariff deals. How many tariff deals have come down the pike here in the last 3 months? And they're still working with China trying to get that hammered out. So this is the kind of thing that Bessent is working on, and it's a full-time job. There's no question about that. So how thinly is he being spread by trying to manage the affairs of Treasury, the thinking, the policy, and then working on trying to manage the day-to-day stuff at the IRS? I just don't think it's possible. I think it's a mistake. I think they got to get a acting commissioner. Well, first of all, they need a commissioner that has the experience in administering the tax code and running an agency like this. They need somebody that fits that role, and they need them sooner than later for a lot of reasons. And the fact of the matter is, somebody within the IRS that's got some high level of management experience with this particular agency is probably a right choice for acting commissioner at this point in time.
Anyone who's worked 2 middle management positions for one salary can tell you that you're probably right. They need to get someone else doing something. That's for sure.
It's going to be impossible for Bessent to run the day-to-day aspects of the IRS, but that's what we need right now. There's so much going on in the IRS right now that they need hands-on management. First and foremost, we've got the one big beautiful bill that was passed into law, right? That's got all kinds of tax changes in it that have to be implemented between now and tax filing season. Now, admittedly, a lot of those changes don't take effect until January 1st, 2026, right? So they're not going to apply to the 2025 tax filing season. Nevertheless, this takes time to turn the system over and get ready to administer this massive law. And so they got to get going on that, and they need somebody who knows what they're doing to oversee that. The IRS has lost, as I said, roughly 20 to 25,000 employees in the last 4 or 5 months. And a commissioner's got to deal with that. He's got to get the IRS realigned to deal with what's going on, not just with the loss of employees. Remember, and we talked about this in our last podcast, I believe, that the Congress of the United States, or the administration now, has proposed about a $2.5 billion budget cut for the IRS going forward. You got to manage fewer employees. You got to manage less money. You got to do it smarter, right? And you got to do it with leadership. What they're doing.
And with no leadership at the moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's obviously not a good place to be in. Now, I think there's one more challenge for an incoming commissioner. The Taxpayer Assistance and Service Act is right now languishing in the Senate, and there's certain aspects of this act that are working their way through Congress as standalone bills.
That's the thing we talked about last week.
Go ahead.
That Taxpayers Assistance Act, that's the thing that we did a whole episode about last week.
The Taxpayer Assistance and Service Act, we did an episode about last week, and we only talked about the aspects of the act that relate to the taxpayer advocate, right? There are 10 different sections of this act. And I just finished an analysis on the section that deals with court jurisdiction. That's going to expand the jurisdiction of the United States Tax Court. I've done an analysis on the section that deals with the IRS's Office of Appeals, which is going to expand the ability of the appeals office to help people solve their problems. So there's 10 different titles to this bill, and I'm working my way through it one title at a time, analyzing this and laying it out for people so they can understand what's going on. That bill needs to pass Congress. There are so many positive elements to this thing that I think it's going to be an absolute godsend for taxpayers in a number of different ways. It's probably the most significant taxpayer assistance legislation since the IRS Restructuring and Reform Act was passed in 1997. It's 30 years now since this kind of high-level positive legislation has been proposed that will help taxpayers. This has got to get through Congress, and I am convinced that the IRS needs a commissioner. We need a commissioner in the Internal Revenue Service that will husband this legislation through Congress to get it passed.
Currently, IRS leadership is very rocky, but where could they be looking for a replacement that could do all the things that you suggest they need done?
In the last 25 years, there have been 2 IRS commissioners that have come from the outside. One of them was Charles Rosati. He was the IRS commissioner in roughly 2000, 2001, 2002. He came from the tech industry, and his was to fix the IRS computers. He he quit in frustration. And as a matter of fact, he made a comment at one point along the way in, roughly 2001. He said, it's just impossible given the scope and breadth of the tax law. Our people are expected to know way too much. It's not possible for anybody to get their arms around this situation.
Computer guy says it's impossible to get your arms around something. Those guys bootstrapped coding language out of ones and zeros. If they can't figure it out,
it shows the level of complexity and the sheer scope of insanity going on with the IRS. The other commissioner that came out of the IRS recently was Reddick. What the heck was his first name? Reddick. I forget his first name, but it doesn't matter. He came from the tax litigation industry, which is where I am from. So he came out of the same business that I'm in. He is a tax attorney. He was dealing with IRS in litigation like I do for all of the years of his career. I don't know how long, 30 years or so. He was brought in from the outside to give an outsider's view. And I think Reddick did some things that were positive. They fall into party line behavior. It doesn't take very long for people to fall into that party line behavior. But in answer to your question specifically, I believe they need to bring somebody in from the outside again that's got experience in tax litigation, experience in understanding what the problems are of taxpayers, how specifically those problems need to be addressed. One thing that has to be a priority with the new IRS commissioner is training IRS appeals officers to deal with collection due process appeal cases. The collection due process appeal right came into being in 1997 as a result of the IRS Restructuring and Reform Act. I believe it is probably the most important, the most powerful right that taxpayers have when they're dealing with the IRS. It is something that levels the playing field as much as anything can level the playing field when an individual citizen is battling the federal government. All right, so this is a critical tool. And one of the problems we have with collection due process is appeals officers that aren't trained in the law sufficiently enough to apply these principles of law to the particular cases that they see in front of them. A couple of years ago, Josh, I was tapped by the IRS's Office of Appeals here in St. Paul to do a webinar for IRS appeals officers because I win so many collection due process appeals cases. This particular appeals office manager noticed this and said, Dan, you're winning these cases all the time. Why don't you help us with a webinar to show us where we're making these mistakes? And I did it. I did a webinar for about 20 or 25 appeals officers. The idea was to carry it out system-wide, but the IRS didn't want to do that. So we didn't carry it out system-wide. But the fact of the matter is these appeals officers need high-level training in the court decisions that bear on how they're going to whether zig or zag in a particular case. So what I would expect from the Office of a Commissioner right off the bat.
Let me just pause you right there for a second. You've teed me up nicely for my next question. Are you going to be putting your name back in the running for IRS Commissioner?
Well, I was thinking about that. Maybe I should send a letter to Secretary Bissett. I haven't decided whether I'm going to do that or not.
You should send a letter, Secretary whoever, but also you, dear viewer, should send a letter to your local congressman, your federal congressman. Send a letter nominating Daniel J. Pilla, the father of the tax resolution industry, author of 15 taxpayer self-help books, as the next IRS commissioner. And I promise you some good will actually.
If they called me up, I certainly would interview for the job. There's no question about that. But if I were commissioner, what I was going to say here, Josh, is the very first thing I would do is convene the Independent Office of Appeals, and I would get the managers in a room and I say, listen, guys, this is what we need to do. Here's where we need to focus our training energy with these appeals officers that handle collection due process appeal cases. In my opinion, that would be the very first thing. The next thing on the list that I think has to happen for the IRS commissioner is the IRS commissioner has got to make himself the advocate. The Office of the Taxpayer Advocate has been in existence since this Restructuring Act in 1997. There's only been two of them. Nina Olson was the first one, and Collins, I forget her first name, is the second one. Both these women were very competent. Their job is to smooth out the bumps in the IRS's administrative system to help taxpayers better navigate the system. Their job is to help them. And so what I would do as commissioner is I would say, listen, we need somebody in the IRS that's working hand in hand with the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate. Because what happens, Josh, is the Taxpayer Advocate identifies these problems people are having. They make these reports to the IRS and say, this is what's going on. This is what we need to fix. And the IRS says, right on, we'll get right on it. Don't worry about a thing. And then not much happens. Some changes are made, but they don't really get on top of this stuff the way they should. There needs to be a direct relationship between IRS management and the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate so that the IRS management can receive these taxpayer advocate suggestions and get them put into practice so that taxpayers have these bumps smoothed out so they can get their problems solved quicker and easier. The third thing that needs to happen is these local offices of taxpayer assistance need to get their phone system set up so they can actually talk to people. This phone system needs to be addressed. That is a critical thing, and it's got to happen sooner than later.
Whether it's an AI or whatever, they have the technology to fix that ASAP. So they really do need to fix that.
And what happens is you've got millions of people calling the Office of the Taxpayer Advocate saying this went wrong, that went wrong, the IRS is doing this, the IRS is not doing that. We see this most specifically with refunds that are held up. People aren't getting the money that the IRS owes them and they need the money. And the second area where this is a huge problem is with identity theft cases. If there's any evidence of identity theft connected with a person's social security number, either the individual can freeze the social security number or the IRS freezes it, and then they give the individual a new taxpayer identification number that they use going forward. It's taking as many as 18 to 19 months for the IRS to work through this backlog of ID theft cases and free up refunds for people. This is a huge hardship for folks depending on their refunds, Josh. And not just refunds. If you've got an ID theft case where somebody has hijacked your bank account or has hijacked your credit cards, it starts with getting your tax situation straightened out, your relationship with the IRS straightened out so you can comply with your tax obligations going forward. This stuff needs to be fixed, and it's taken too much time.
If you owe the IRS money, they'll let you know, but God forbid they owe you any money. They'll take their time.
No doubt about that.
So I think that covers it for this week's Taxpayers. Thanks for watching. Remember, there's no such thing as a hopeless tax case. And if you think yours is the exception, get a hold of Dan here and he can help you see the daylight. Dan, tell them where else they can follow along with your taxpayers' rights.
Follow me at Pillow Talks Taxes. I'm primarily on TikTok, Facebook, Truth Social, and right here on YouTube. Like these videos, subscribe to our channel, share the videos, especially with your U.S. representatives and your U.S. senator. And as I said, I'd interview for the job. If somebody from the administration calls me, I'd administer for the job. But if you've got a tax problem right now, go to my website, TaxHelpOnline.com. Buy any book off my website at any price point, and you get a free 15-minute consultation directly and personally with me. So go to TaxHelpOnline.com right now and start fixing your problem.